Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Cathal Sharov, Carja own Aware now because a Carja own New Halen. I'm delighted to be here this morning. My name is David Leydon and I head up food and agribusiness with IFAC. So on screen here at the moment you have Ruth Leary, who is head of strategy and engagement with AgriZero New Zealand. And Ruth's story for us in Ireland is really, really applicable and valuable. I am going to be joined by Elliot, Mercer and Cathal Fitzgerald from IFAC, but I don't see those guys here yet. But I'm sure they're going to pop into the breakout room. They're probably just gone up the wrong corridor. They're gone down the wrong hall. So Ruth, all attention is going to be on you for the next few minutes. So thank God you're off mute and we can focus on you, Ruth. So tell us firstly.
Not on purpose, I promise.
You better be a good talker, Ruth, because there's no sign of Elliot or Cathal in this breakout room. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Ruth, who you work with, about your organisation, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you, David. Tēnā koutou, everybody. Ko Ruth Leary, tōku ingoa. As David said, I'm head of strategy and engagement at AgriZero. AgriZero started this year, actually, the 1st of February in New Zealand. We are a public-private partnership between the New Zealand government and agribusinesses in New Zealand. And our focus really is a more aggressive one than the New Zealand government, even though they are signed on as a shareholder of ours, to reduce agricultural emissions 30% by 2030. The New Zealand government's target is 10% of methane by 2030. So we're focused on livestock emissions. We're an investment fund, essentially, and with the government matching dollar for dollar, the private sector companies' financial contributions. And so far we have around New Zealand 165 million to spend on our remit, and we have ventures funding. That ventures funding is where we'll take an equity stake in a company with a promising tool or technology that we want to see commercialise in New Zealand and into the hands of our farmers. Everything we're investing in really is to accelerate our progress and get tools into the hands of farmers faster. So normally with the venture investments, it's sort of earlier stage seed through Series A, maybe Series B, and it's really focused on those absolute reductions. So not just intensity improvements, but absolute reductions of agricultural emissions. Like Ireland, I think New Zealand's quite similar. Almost half of our emissions are coming from agriculture. In Ireland, I think it's nearly 40%. So we also are a pasture-based system. And on that recent delegation I was on, quite, really, it was my first visit to Ireland, actually, and really impressed and interested in what I saw in the conversations we had. The similarity of the farming system, the pasture-based system as well, was really great. Just on AgriZero, we do have catalyst funding as well. So that funding is sort of to catalyse unblocking of sort of system-wide constraints. So it's not an equity stake in a business, that is more system-wide, and it could be investing in testing infrastructure, for example, to trial technologies that might mitigate emissions. That's an example. Could also be closer to the adoption end of things as well, somehow to enable or incentivize that also.
Okay, Ruth, I'm going to focus in there on the trial testing, right? Because that's definitely a big challenge. It takes time. The science community, it takes time for them to sort of verify what's happening. How are you actually helping with, how's the Catalyst Fund helping with that testing piece?
Yeah, very good question. As I said, we've been going since February, so we've spent the first part of time really understanding the landscape and what those constraints are, what are the slowdowns, but also what is needed as far as regulation and legislation, and to ensure if a farmer is using something on his farm, how does that ultimately get expressed in our greenhouse gas inventory? And eventually the farmer might be incentivised or offset a levy that has been committed to before 2030 by the new government. So really the testing requirements are based on the type of product it is and ensuring that it's safe for the animal, safe for humans and the resulting products like the milk or the meat, and also safe for handling, and also achieves that efficacy. So, if it's saying it's a 20% methane reduction if given at a certain dose per day to an animal, is it actually achieving that in our farming system in New Zealand? So those are the sorts of things that we want to enable testing. Some of the equipment's really expensive, and some of the chambers and devices that measure the emissions from the animals themselves, really costly, hundreds of thousands, even $1 million for New Zealand dollars, that is, for some of the testing equipment. And that's really hard if you're trying to scale and accelerate if things are that expensive. So we're also looking at that whole enabling network of measurement and testing equipment too, and seeing what's new and what can be validated and verified to apply if you're registering for an approval for a product, for example.
Ruth, is AgriZero linking in with the university system or with the research systems, or who are you linking in with to do the actual testing and the verification?
Yeah, good question. We're linking in. It depends on what stage it's at. If it's early stage or proof of concept, then it's more the research organisations, and we're partnered with the New Zealand greenhouse gas testing research facility down in Palmerston North in New Zealand. But we're working around the world actually to find things for the testing when it comes to actually mimicking more the farm system and the efficacy. There's Dairy New Zealand, an industry body who do contract research, and there's also AgResearch, which is a government-funded research agency, a little bit like a part of your Chagas, which we got to visit, and very impressive.
I see we've some Chagas senior people on the call here this morning. Now, Ruth, AgriZero is a collaboration between a number of very major ag businesses in New Zealand. How did it come about, and how did you actually pull all those, some of them are competing, businesses together to create this 165 million fund to actually invest in the projects? So how did it come together?
Yeah. How did we do it? Yeah, really good question. And there was a little bit, I said we started on the 1st of February. There was a good year or so in the lead up to that. How it came about, really, it started when it was quite a large climate budget announced by the New Zealand government. At the same time, the CEOs of the agribusinesses in New Zealand were feeling the pressure from our global customers, who have set really aggressive targets for their own greenhouse gas emissions targets, often the scope 3 emissions, which New Zealand, as such a big exporter, have quite a big impact on. Even though, we might have 5 million in our herd of milking cows, we're a pretty big exporter, the likes of Fonterra, for example. So they're feeling that pressure to actually be more aggressive and move faster than, I think I mentioned, the New Zealand government target was a 10% reduction in methane. We've got, a requirement to go faster than that from those global customers like a Nestle or a Danone. Those are some examples. So to maintain our place, it's sort of, as a leading exporter and to protect the sector, we need to be more aggressive and we need to accelerate the emissions reduction faster. And so the CEOs really got together and it went together essentially to the New Zealand government to have that conversation, and the idea of the joint venture was sort of formed out of that. And then they went through the process of onboarding and signing shareholders agreements, and actually we are having conversations now to bring on some more shareholders as well, but just we've got the 7 founding shareholders currently.
Very good. It's great to see, and it's great to see that, look at scope 3 is such, it's going to change the life of everyone in the value chain. And if you're going to supply to Danone or Nestle, scope 3 is going to be a big part of your life going forward, and it's the same here in Ireland. Ruth, your own role as head of strategy engagement with AgriZero, what's your own background? Where did you come from originally?
Yeah, good question. Actually, was originally seconded to AgriZero from a dairy company who works on quite high value infant formulas and specialty nutritional milk powders, company called Synlait. Prior to that, I've spent actually from a farm, if we go way back, a sheep and beef and deer farm in the southern part of New Zealand that has now been converted to dairying and run by my brother. But I've been involved in food science and nutrition my whole life and working in the business to business industry, supplying some of those global customers different specialty nutritional ingredients, and also been on the sort of alternative proteins and alternative side of things as well. So yeah, I've worked for some of the big agricultural companies in the US, like Archer Daniels Midland, for example, previously as well.
Okay, we won't start on the alternative protein conversation yet. Look at this, Ruth. Elliot has landed into the room. He was down the hall. He's now come back. So we might take
a little bit lost. I apologize,
Ruth.
A little bit lost.
Elliot, you're very welcome. I don't know how. You must have just gone down the wrong road.
I got lost somewhere in there.
It's okay, but it's great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And you're taking a little bit of pressure off Ruth as well, which is no harm.
Are you just having a one-on-one conversation here? I like it.
Yes, we are. So the first thing, Elliot, is tell us a little bit about Agnition Ventures and about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. My name's Elliot. I'm General Manager for Innovation for Agnition. We're a commercialization and venture arm of Ravensdown. And for those that aren't familiar with Ravensdown, it's a large co-op here, which in New Zealand that provides getting lots of background from somebody.
I think Larkin Bannon there needs to mute himself. If he can.
Thank you.
Job done.
Ravensdown, large co-op, if you're not familiar with it, providing sort of inputs and nutrients for farmers and growers across New Zealand. We think of Agnition as sort of being the speedboat next to the mothership. Overall, our drive is to sort of find, build, and grow sort of high potential opportunities. A real focus on sort of real world challenges for farmers. That also includes an aspect of investing in technology as well. So we have an investment component to that, and then we have sort of an internal component as well. Myself, I've sort of been driving innovation through different sort of industries. I've largely been in a different industry recently, so I'm relatively new to agriculture. So for me, it's been a really fun journey sort of getting involved in Agritech over the last sort of 6 to 12 months.
So, Elliot, you're in the speedboat. You're investing in companies in Agritech, right? What are you looking for in those companies and in those organizations?
Yeah, I guess our criteria of what we're focusing on is probably a little bit more narrow. We're looking for sort of soil health, nutrient management. So we're looking for quite a specific space on that. But we are, I guess, more broadly, we're open to other opportunities as well. So we have our view and our focus of what we want to look at, but we're keeping our mind open to what else is going on in the world as well. But we want to invest in winners. We want commercially viable businesses that are going to grow and be financially successful. That's a really fundamental underlying aspect of what we're doing.
And are you taking a small equity stake and then growing it over time when they meet certain hurdles, or are you actually buying the full company and all the IP and the people in one go, or is it a mixture?
It's a mixture, but I'd say largely we're taking small stakes and just sort of growing and doing some follow-ons here and there. We are looking at relatively early stage stuff, so pre-seed, seed, Series A, depending on what's happening there. Relatively small stakes. I'd call ourselves very much in the strategic bucket. We don't have a big wallet. We are trying to make clever strategic plays and use our sort of collaborative approach for bringing value to the table as well.
Okay. Ruth, I'll come back to you there for a second and just talk about the wider agtech ecosystem in New Zealand at the moment. Where is the innovation bubbling up from? Is it from farm, from within agribusinesses, from the scientific community, or from maybe people that are outside of agriculture and see opportunities through a different lens or a different mindset?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it is interesting where it's coming from. I think there is some people who are focused on the climate impact and then the first thing you look at really in New Zealand is methane, as far as something that we could potentially really move the needle on. So there has been some quite interesting thinking about that. We've been researching for a good 10 odd years down in Palmerston North on agricultural emissions and ways to try and reduce and mitigate. So that tells you it's not an easy task in a pasture-based system. The innovation, we're seeing it come through the typical university and sometimes the accelerators. As I said before, we're normally getting involved at sort of a seed Series A stage and allowing for some follow-on investment as well for future rounds. But we're looking globally, but we're really impressed with what we've seen in New Zealand. You go around the New Zealand field days, which are like a version of your national ploughing, but a little bit less wet and damp if we go by this year's
less muck as well.
Ploughing. Yeah, we see the innovation coming from the companies themselves. So Elliot mentioned he's from Ravensdown, who supply actually fertilizers to farmers, but also things like the protected urea or urease inhibitors, as we call them. They're also doing a lot of work on nitrification inhibitors. So the companies themselves are trying to innovate. At AgriZero, through our shareholders, we've actually pulled in a lot of the research projects they had going as well into our portfolio. And yeah, I'd say we've made 4 investments so far. There's a number of others in due diligence, but one of them is in a slow release bolus product from a New Zealand company. One was from a startup out of the USA. So, and then also we've invested in some infrastructure in New Zealand and a research program in New Zealand as well.
When you were in Ireland, did you see anything, Ruth, that attracted you in particular?
Yeah, a few things that attracted me. As far as we did meet with a couple of companies who are thinking sort of in an innovative way about new types of inhibitors for methane in particular. So we had a couple of meetings with ventures. Really enjoyed our conversations with the likes of Tulan and then Chargisk to see that they're thinking in a similar way to us. How do we solve for pasture-based farming emissions reduction, and what are we looking at and researching, and have done quite a lot of trial work testing some of the things that we've also been looking at. Yeah, there was, I went to a session at Munster University and heard someone talking about his idea of putting an inhibitor product into a bale wrap, an edible bale wrap. I thought that sounded really cool, and I can't wait to see that come to fruition one day.
And it's great to have Kieran on the call here today as well, from Munster University. Now, Ruth and Elliot, I'm going to park you guys for a minute, and we're going to turn our focus to Cathal Fitzgerald, who's jumped into the room. Cathal, you're very welcome. Cathal is the Senior Investment Director in Food and Agribusiness with IFAC. Cathal, tell us a little bit about IFAC.
Yeah, thanks, David, and sorry, guys. I was a few minutes on the farmers panel, which I found interesting as well, and the definition of Agtech as they see it. We're a sovereign investor. We're the sovereign development fund of of Ireland, and I suppose I head up the food and agriculture investment team within IFAC, and our strategy is very much aligned with the national food strategy. To make Ireland a leader in sustainable food systems. And what we're trying to do is develop an ecosystem within the food and ag side that supports that. And I mean by an ecosystem, a kind of an investment landscape. We look at the investment landscape and see where are the gaps here. And back in, when we looked at this, I joined in 2014, and we spent a period 2014, 2015 looking at what are the gaps here. And we identified Agtech as a sector that needed further investment. Was various studies done in UCD and so forth, and showed that the venture landscape. So we started our investment in 2016 in Finisterre Ventures. They're a West Coast based Agtech fund, and they headquartered an office here. And since then, we've seen quite a lot of activity in the Agtech space, with other investors coming in like Yield Lab, Astonor Ventures, also active, and other funds dipping in and out on various opportunities. So the ecosystem has developed, and as it develops, we kind of relook at that each couple of years. Say, okay, what's moved on, and what are the learnings from the previous experience? And one of the learnings from the Finisterre Ventures, which was a Series A, B, or the Series A and further investment focus, was, after a couple of years looking at that, said actually the market actually needs earlier stage investment. It needs seed and pre-seed, in fact, investment. And Finisterre themselves pivoted and developed that aspect of the incubators, and they've alliances with the New Zealand government through Sprout, and they managed that incubator there through their FE3 fund, and also one in Israel with the government. So that's a new focus, and in the next number of months, we'll be supporting a lot more on the earlier stage across the portfolio, but will include opportunities for ag tech companies. So we're essentially a part of that system, and Enterprise Ireland, we work closely with them to try and support that developing system, and we're extending it out now. We're looking at Agritech, because that's an area that's very much on horizon. The whole marine area, circular and bioeconomy comes into it as well. So the full gambit of farm, and then upstream, you look at biomethane and so forth. We're heavily involved there, but that's more further upstream with proven technologies.
And Cathal, at this stage now, and so you've been around this ag tech ecosystem in Ireland for a number of years. How would you rate the ag tech ecosystem now? Do you think it's in a strong position in Ireland? And I'm going to come to Elliot and Ruth after that and ask them the same question about New Zealand. Do you think we're in a good position? Is there enough technology and innovation coming through?
Yeah, so if you you go back, and we started looking at it as 14, 15, it was very much an in the evolutionary stage. You accelerate forward to where we are now, and what's changed in the meantime. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the learning is a lot of the companies coming through are at that earlier stage, so they need that kind of incubation area, that kind of accelerator approach. And we're seeing that. We see the announcement with the AgTech UCD Innovation Centre, the work that's going on in MTU, yourselves, AgTech Ireland, being formed to support these emerging companies. So we're seeing at that stage, there's a lot of companies coming through at that earlier stage, the spin outs from the universities or the various projects coming from entrepreneurs growing up. So there's a greater support now coming in. Enterprise Ireland are playing a very big role with the innovation arena. That's relatively recent development, but it's really blossomed, and you're seeing a lot of companies come through that. So we're seeing a lot there. We're positioning ourselves so that the capital will be there now, more at the seed and pre-seed stage, and then once the company starts growing up, we have a whole portfolio of funds that can help companies grow up. So we're quite confident once you get to the Series A and beyond, we've a lot of options that will help those companies not just develop in Ireland, but develop into Europe and into the US, which is obviously where there's a big market. But being a pasture-based system, we have to kind of look to the New Zealand side as well, or the Southern Hemisphere, because there's more similarities there. Our technology is coming out of there, and we're glad to say that we are heavily involved with the Sprout Accelerator in that. So I think more and more we should develop that linkage with New Zealand, because we've similar problems. Three of the main ones: methane, nitrogen, and water. So that ecosystem is developing, and the joint research initiative between the two governments solidifies that relationship there, and there's more and more closer collaborations between the various participants, Teagasc and the departments with New Zealand. So I think it's in a much better place, but we still need to continue the momentum that's built up to now.
Elliot, thanks, Cathal. Elliot, for Agnition Ventures, are you seeing the pipeline that you would have hoped to see when Ravensdown created Agnition? Is the pipeline there?
Yeah, look, I find this a really interesting question. I guess speaking overall, I mean, what I've been surprised at is that there's a huge amount of appetite and passion in the agri-tech space. I think I've seen a huge amount of interest from and a lot of research from fundamental researchers. Everybody has a lot of strong passion and interest for the space, but I'd probably mirror Cathal's position a little bit, in that it sort of feels like there's a little bit of maturity lacking in that, kind of taking those technologies through and really building really, really robust businesses. And I think that's sort of something that we could unpack a little bit further, but it seems like that sort of the people that can enable and sort of take some of those concepts and ideas and really turn them into thriving, frothing businesses it sort of seems to be a skill set that maybe is just not getting coupled as effectively with some of these early stages. From an Agnition point of view, we are quite narrow in our focus at the outset. We're relatively new into our setup. So we have found, from a pipeline point of view, we're exhausting our pipeline within New Zealand quite quickly for our investment opportunities. Now, we fully expect that will continue to come, and we'll see new things come. But we're already exploring internationally quite heavily because there's not that immediate opportunity right here in our backyard. But I think the broader ecosystem across New Zealand and internationally is really, really healthy. I just think within New Zealand specifically, I think we've definitely got some work to do on how we sort of take some of these great ideas and concepts and some of the fantastic research that's been happening, but how do we turn that into actually real businesses, real products, really tangible outcomes? Because there seems to be a bit of a hurdle there.
Yeah, I think we're seeing the same hurdle. Just on the same question, where has impressed you? So you're now scanning the horizon, you're scanning other countries. What other countries or what other areas have you seen a lot of development that has impressed you guys?
Yeah, I think there's some interesting stuff coming out of Europe. But I mean, look, I thought I was on the trip to Ireland. I thought there's some great stuff that's happening there. I mean, I personally saw some really interesting stuff around how we're sort of managing our soil, which I find, I mean, from our point of view, is really fascinating. How you sort of look at that more holistically. Some of the sort of biological solutions that are coming through. There's obviously lots of discussion about carbon and sequestration. I think coupled to that, and the phase on is sort of looking at how we measure that. And I think there's a lot of really interesting work being done around how do we look at measurement of carbon, looking at measurement and testing of sort of soil content and so forth. I mean, from our point of view, that was really fascinating stuff, and we saw some interesting stuff bubble up at the World Agritech Summit there in Ireland. So, look, I think there's interesting stuff happening out there, both in Europe and Ireland. And then North America, we're just starting to sort of dabble over that way as well. And we have seen quite a lot of maturity over there. It's just, there's not that natural synergies around sort of their approach to farming. So, but it doesn't mean that I don't think there's great opportunities in that neck of the wood as well.
Okay, thank you. Ruth, in terms of the ecosystem and its strength at the moment, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, we've found similar within the New Zealand context. There's been a lot of great science happening for a long time, but we're still in a position where there's not many direct new sort of mitigations that farmers can use to help them reduce their emissions. There's been some historical products that have been around a long time, but a good decade or so of research, and it's still been hard to get something commercialized to help us with absolute emissions reduction. Although there is some things getting to that point now in their development. So yeah, the early stage seed funding is really important to make sure there's enough coming into that pipeline. I think we've got around 60 things in our long list pipeline, but that's global. But quite a few are coming out of New Zealand and Ireland because we are very focused on, enabling technologies that will suit our farming systems. So delivery mechanisms, of a, say, additive that might reduce methane in an animal, thinking about slow release or novel delivery that's not just in a mixed ration they may get in a barn-fed shed feeding system in another country. So that's really interesting. Miniaturization is really interesting to see that too, of wearable devices and vaccine work. But some of that is happening in New Zealand, some of that's happening in all around the world.
We've only 10 minutes left, so there's a great audience here. So if anybody has a question from the audience, pop it into the box there, and the drill. Pop it into the box, and we'll ask it if it's sensible enough. In terms of counter seasonality and using to speed up trials and to speed up research, we all talk about it. Anytime you meet New Zealand, counter seasonality is a great thing. Is it happening? So? Cathal, I'll start with you. Are you seeing it happening from an Irish companies using New Zealand to speed up their rate of testing and that piece?
Yeah, I think it's probably true. It's in the early stage. I think those linkages are probably not sufficiently developed yet. between there's certainly work going on with Chags, but we probably need to step that up and maybe solidify that a bit more around specific areas. But I think there's more to be done there, I suppose, to answer the question, David. And I think it should be an objective going forward in terms of that closer collaboration, because obviously there's learnings on both sides, and when two heads are put together, they will make far quicker progress. So I think there's probably more to be done on that particular one, and it should be an area that we focus more attention on.
Elliot, Ruth, any comment? Would you agree with Cathal?
Yeah, I think so too. We've been having some initial conversations with AgriZero and potential collaborations to do that exact thing, where you get 2 springs in a year, so you can, with 2 seasons, you can speed up some of the trials that do require that timeline. I think in the pre-competitive space in particular, there's a lot of collaboration we should do, and it's in both of our best interests, to protect our pasture-fed farming methods on that global stage. Also, as good global citizens, most of the methane in the world is burped out by animals in a grazing system. So, we could be really pioneering some of that testing and trialing, slower release, mitigation technology that could ultimately end up having an impact in those lesser developed nations as well.
And
Okay.
oh no,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
you go. Oh, I was just going to. Sorry, you go, David.
Oh, go ahead, Elliot. Now, yeah.
Sorry. No, look, the only thing I was going to add is, look, I think to a certain degree we're not doing it, right? Like, I think to your point, David, is I think there is a lot of talk about it, but actually getting it done is hard. I think there's naturally some, collaboration between some, research agencies where they probably have some good existing co-relationships internationally where we could probably try and lean into that a bit more. But I also think there's opportunity for whether it's industry or maybe some particular startups to try and help champion and drive that, to say, hey, look, let's do it. Let's actually take it by the scruff of the neck and make it happen. And I think that's something where, look, I think we can all try and lean into that as best we can. But I think there's a better way of making it happen as somebody actually leading the charge and demonstrating how it's done.
And it may be that Agritech New Zealand and AgTech Ireland have a role in maybe signposting or matching the right companies with each other, which could be useful. Now, Tim Cutfield, very good Tim, has asked a sensible question. What new technologies are you seeing in measuring carbon sequestration in soils? And Elliot, I'll go straight to you on that one.
Yeah, I saw a couple over there. There's one called Mercer, which is actually an American company that was sort of bubbled up. But there's some guys out of Montreal called Chrysalab, and I'm trying to remember the other one that started with a P. There was a couple of guys at the World Agritech Summit as well. But look, there's a lot of the stuff is based around sort of taking a hyperspectral approach, and they're sort of taking different sort of business case sort of approaches to how they want to demonstrate that. I know they're still in the process of trying to validate it fully and prove it out, but there's definitely some interesting developments happening there. And I think it's just the concept of understanding that this is a problem to be solved attracts people, and if we can solve it, it's a really interesting step forwards in how we consider carbon within soil.
Cathal, the carbon debate in Ireland is complicated, and the lack of clarity, I guess, in that carbon conversation from a farmer perspective and from an ag perspective. Any comment on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of frustration. There's a lot being talked about. And I suppose what's complicating is the EU policy isn't fully yet formed yet. We have a carbon farming framework at the EU level that's been worked through. And I suppose what frustrates farmers is, people saying, well, you'll get, €100 per tonne from carbon farming measures if you can measure and verify that. The voluntary carbon markets, the most that's being paid is €25 a tonne. So even if you could measure it, that's about as far as you will get. There's also the backdrop in terms of the quality of carbon, and we're seeing various kind of revelations of whatever, on different schemes or programs used internationally. So it is a hot area. The key enabler here will be the measurement, reporting, and verification, and ensuring that the permanence is in the carbon, that it is permanent and can be locked away, and they will ultimately be the higher quality. carbon credits. So a lot still to be done. We have a land use policy under development in Ireland. I think it'll be a while yet before that is finalised, and that links into the broader EU kind of land use policy framework. So a lot to be done there, but we probably have to reset expectations around this, that it'll probably be 2025, 2026 when we see anything meaningful around, and try and diffuse it a little bit from the point of view of people expecting something in the shorter term. I think in the medium term there are a lot of positives that should come, but it'll all hinge on that, and what sort of a voluntary carbon market will evolve, and who has the entitlement and how can they be traded. So they're the key questions still need to be resolved.
Okay, we've about 3 minutes left. So there is a lot of founders on this call, and for Cathal, Elliot and Ruth, maybe 1 or 2 top tips for founders when they go and reach out to you guys after this meeting or down the road. So maybe we'll start with Elliot with your Agnition Ventures hat on. 1 or 2 top tips. 3 minutes to go.
Yeah, really quick. Look, I think having a strong team, having a balance within your sort of leadership there, it's unlikely that a single founder can kind of shape up and do everything that needs to be done. So I think building a strong team around that initial sort of seed idea is important. I think it's really critical to sort of understand and have a really clear position that you're solving problems that are problems that need to be solved, and that you've got a really clear vision around that future markets opportunity, the size of that, the scale of that. I mean, from our point of view, we can solve some really great and interesting, we see it all the time, some great ideas and really cool concepts. But we're also looking from a financial investment and that commercial opportunity of that business. You need to understand what that market opportunity is and how we could scale and grow into that. It's really a big part of that conversation. So even from an early stage, having a view of what that might look like is really powerful.
Thanks, Elliot. Ruth?
Yes, quickly. Strong team or team of advisors is always useful, like Elliot said. I think for us, it's really that they're coming to us with a willingness to learn or appreciation of our farming context here. So we're not, farming the way they do in the Netherlands, New Zealand and Ireland alike. So we're not just going to be able to take something that's working there and just plug it into our system. We've got to make it work. The efficacy is going to be different that we'll achieve of a technology that might reduce nitrous oxide or methane. And I think having a good plan showing where the funds will go, what the timeline and the milestones are that they're looking for, and specific to the New Zealand context, and getting their product commercialised and a regulatory approval in New Zealand.
Okay, Cathal, we mightn't even get to you. I think we're going to be popped out of this room in about 30 seconds. If you had one line there.
Yeah, I think be clear on the benefit of, is it a saving and efficiency? And quantify that, and who's going to be the payer for that? Is it a farmer, is it a customer? Because you really need to prove the benefit to the farmer or who the customer is, whether it's a